This episode is presented by Playback, the Canadian film and TV industry's top source for business news and analysis. Visit playbackonline.ca for industry updates.
Canadian film and TV is at a crossroads. More talent than ever, but fewer doors open. How do diverse creators cut through the noise, get their projects greenlit by the decision makers, all without compromising the culture integrity of their story? On the DOV Elevate Podcast, we sit down with two guests who strategically navigated the pitfalls, the breakthroughs, and the mountaintop moments. The industry is shifting because culture isn't just a backdrop. It needs to be the lead. And it's time this industry treats Canadian stories as the rule, not the exception.
Hi, I'm your host, Vanessa Mitchell, and producer of Banff Special Programs. Today, I'm with two filmmakers with two very different paths through a system that doesn't always make it an easy process. Chapman and Jamie Blorque-Blyan. Welcome to the DOV Elevate Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so both of you came to filmmaking, carrying something very personal. Carrying your thoughts as a young girl on If Rage Was Contagious. And Jamie, you started to document the stories of your community in 2008. When did you realize that the camera was the right tool for what you needed to say?
It's a rough question. Not rough, just complicated, because trying to find the beginning when you're somewhere lost in the middle is tricky. But I was in a program when I was about 16, and they put cameras in the hands of youth, and that's kind of how I was used to seeing the world and seeing myself, and just trying to understand things through the lens. And it was really powerful. It was really powerful to be able to use a tool that was initially used against me as a way to express myself and see the world. And so I started picking up a camera quite early on. And so it just felt natural to use it as a way to express my displeasure.
I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into that. You mentioned how it was a weapon used against you. What do you mean by that?
I mean, not Citizen Kane. Birth of a Nation was the very first film ever made. And I remember watching that film in film class and being the only Black student in the class, and, being asked to unpack what I just saw, when, if you've seen it, it is, the first formal cuts, the first long shot, so many firsts were established in that film, but it was also this deeply racist and propaganda machine, but how Black people should be seen, and how Black people should see themselves. And so that's the beginning of cinema, in a sense, right? That's where we started. And if that's where we started, then trying to unpack every single film that I've watched was confusing, because I'd grown to love cinema. And then you realize that it was this way of putting, Black folks in a box, and to be able to use cinema and film felt powerful, and it felt like it was something that I wasn't allowed, or it wasn't intended for me to use. And so that's why I feel like it felt dangerous.
I appreciate that. Thank you for unpacking that more, Karen. And Jamie, what was it for you? When did you realize that would be the right tool for you to say what you needed to say?
I think I realized a camera or filmmaking was the right tool for me about the age of 14. My mother bought a camera for the family from Costco, brought it home, and living out in the bush, we didn't get a lot of channels. Like, we had an antenna that was, you had to turn to a certain way to watch a certain station. And in the wintertime, when it was frozen to the ground, like you were stuck watching CBC for 3 weeks. And I feel that being able to create our own stories with my cousins. Like I grew up in this place called Buffalo Lake, and I lived alongside this lake with my grandparents and my mother and my father, and I had like 74 first cousins. So they would come over and we would make a remake of like The Leprechaun all night. And then we would like sit there and we would watch it, and we would like, it was a really fun time to like come together and to make something creative and pass the time, but able to share a story that not only was like our perspective being seen on a screen, but able to come together and make it as a group. There's power in that.
I love that. That's so deeply connected to family and community, that first start. So Karen, your film Village Keeper evolved from a documentary concept about Toronto gun violence into a short film called Measure at the CFC, which eventually would serve as a foundation for the feature. How long was that journey? Tell us a little bit about that, from the original documentary idea to calling to action on the feature, and what kept you going through all of it.
I think what kept me going was my curiosity with how my body was reacting to violence, the news, and things around me, and how affected I was still after our family had experienced our own trauma. And I realized that I wasn't alone in that confusion. I wasn't alone in the awkwardness of trying to be normal when you have all of these other huge things that you're dealing with in your life. And it just made me realize that we don't have enough resources, I think, frankly, to talk about, where it all goes in your body and where it all goes in your loved ones, and how repressing things manifests. And so, if 2005 in Toronto was a very violent year, there were a lot of homicides, a lot of murders, and it was concurrent. And it was something that I think shaped my life and a lot of the folks around me. And there was just this desire to keep talking about how this thing was like this blob all over my life, and how I was kind of navigating through it. I think that's what having the camera as a tool did for me, was this ability to analyze my own thoughts through a lens.
Okay, and Jamie, was it the same for you? I mean, you've been in the industry since 2009 as a director, writer, producer. That's over 15 years of building towards your feature. So what kept you going and sustained you?
Maybe I feel the thing that kept me going was maybe anger. The first feature I ever done is a film called Reconciliation, like the phonetic spelling of reconciliation. And it was a film about colonial violence, how it has affected my family specifically over a number of generations. And just trying to get a broadcaster in Canada, unfortunately, to care about sharing that story of how you can acknowledge that history as truth, and to make it into a film that would look to how you can take that memory or those memories and use them in a way that could prevent from those same types of mistakes, I guess you can say, if you can call them mistakes, or those atrocities to happen again. It was difficult. A lot of broadcasters and funders in Canada were like, no, we feel the story you're trying to tell is not true. And I ended up having to take my film to a pitching forum in Greece called Docs in Thessaloniki. I'm pretty sure we were the only Canadian film at that pitch forum, and a lot of the feedback I would get was, "Well, why don't people care about this history in so-called Canada?" And I didn't know how to answer that. It was a really hard question to answer. Like that's a question I would like to answer it as well. I don't know why folks don't care about the unspoken history of how Indigenous peoples were treated in so-called Canada. So it was difficult for me to I guess getting all those no's. And then getting my first funder or my first investment in Greece about a Canadian film from a distributor in Belgium. It was bittersweet, I guess you can say. Yeah, it was. I think that was the main thing, because that documentary, I was developing it for, I would say, about 8 years before it was even taken into a development phase with APTN, and it was. I don't know. It's not just the the feature documentary that I did. Like I am now going into like scripted content as well, and I had to go through this whole process too of like development hell from like 2009 to 2020 of trying to create scripted Indigenous content that was considered marketable. And I think that was one of the biggest feedback I ever got was, oh, Indigenous content is niche. It's not marketable to international markets. Then having to work with non-Indigenous mentors. Like I had an executive producer mentor for maybe about 6 years. And we would get development deals to create scripted content, but a lot of the times we would hire non-Indigenous writers to share those stories. And I was always like, okay, this is a flag for me. This is like this one show we tried to make one time was about these kids that were living in a group home, and this non-Indigenous writer took it to like it was these young people that had access to all these resources, which is not the lived reality of folks who are living in those types of systems. So it just wasn't realistic. It never aligned with who I was or what the story actually was, and it never ever went anywhere. So I think that was those are two of the big things, is getting folks to, or broadcasters or funders, to see the value in Indigenous storytelling in a market that is commercial, and then also having the right team that can speak to those experiences of those stories you're trying to share.
Well, I think you're bringing up some really good points here, and I just kind of want to zone in on that. The first is that you had to leave Canada and get funding elsewhere to make a Canadian story. Can you just talk more about how that got unlocked? Was it just you just went to this pitch forum? Did you win it? How did you get that? If others are looking for, not that we should, hopefully projects get greenlit within, obviously, our own country first. But if people are looking for different avenues to get things funded like you did through other systems, can you just talk a little bit more about that exact moment where, you got someone internationally to come in and fund this?
I'm trying to think of how I even came across this pitch forum. I think maybe I was just Googling documentary pitch international. And when I went to Greece, like it wasn't like a fancy trip or anything. Like I think, but after I paid for my ticket and paid for like the hostel I was staying in, I think I went with a couple $100 in order to like pitch this film. And I also stayed in this hostel where like where I got bit by bed bugs, so I had like these big welts on my face, and I went into the space where I had to. The pitch-in forum was, I thought it was funny though, because like the pitch-in forum itself was, you work with these top producers and directors and editors from all over Europe. And I walked into the space like ready to pitch my film, and I've been practicing this thing for years. And they're like, okay, tell me about your project. And I couldn't. I just started to like tumble over my own words, and I thought I failed that first moment of pitching, like, trying to share my idea of what this film, of what I wanted it to be. And they tore my project down, and they helped me build it up over a 3-day period, and were super supportive. And by the end of the third day of working with these folks, you go into this pitch auditorium, and you're in front of about 12 different distributors and funders from all over Europe, and you got 7 minutes to pitch your idea in front of this auditorium, like 300 folks. And that's where I got my first yes, was from this Belgian distributor who saw the value in the story that I was trying to share. Um, and
It only takes
oh,
one
sorry.
person, right? It only takes one person to see that value, and you kept going. So, I mean, kudos to you with that. But then when someone sees the value, so not just in this last the film you were talking about, but when someone sees the value and say you do get someone that you were explaining before, non-Indigenous, to come on board and to partner, but then somewhere along the line the story doesn't start to feel authentic. Where's your line for that? You know, when do you say, hey, I don't feel comfortable moving forward? It's not feeling authentic enough.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest. Because a lot of times when you hear no to when you pitch your project so many times, like just a yes and willing to bend a little bit in order to
Yeah.
get your project on screen seems like sometimes the answer. And when I make these films, I don't make them just for myself. Like I have my mother and my son and my sister to take care of. I have a huge family. There's a whole community of Indigenous filmmakers that I try my best to bring up with me and have that community impact as I make this content. And I think now for me though, it's you have to be not only proud and satisfied with what you make at the end of the day, but it also needs to feel authentic as well. Especially when a lot of times folks who are underrepresented, their experiences are never shared in the way that they should be. So I think even though I'm struggling with, sometimes I need to bend a little bit to do a co-pro or to have to work with folks who I normally wouldn't. It's important to, I feel, have those experiences because it makes you, I guess, I don't want to say difficult to work with, but to have those morals and those values to stand upon in order to have authentic
Yes.
content created, I think is the most important thing.
I think that's beautifully said, in the sense also too that you're shedding a light on, I think, what a lot of Indigenous, Black, people of color often feel, that when making creative work, it's also bringing people up as well. And I'll swing that actually over to Karen in terms of this next question. It fits perfectly into that. You know, there was a really interesting choice, Karen, that you made when you did Village Keeper in terms of casting Maxine Simpson. She's a retired ICU nurse who had never read a script before. You put her in a major role, and despite, kind of pushback, there's pushback. Can you talk about, what it takes to, again, protect your creative idea and instinct and story, but then also how important it means to bring up and bring in and open up the space, people from our community, frankly, that have never had that experience, but the talent is there. The opportunity hasn't.
Yeah, I think I think when you're used to making a mickle out of a muckle, you also get used to risk. And so I just had a feeling. I just had a feeling it was going to work. I just had a feeling, and it's not something that you could explain to people in an intelligible way. I just knew. And a part of that knowing was going through the casting system. And we did meet some really wonderful actors who are on the top of their game. But Oleniki Edele looks great for her age. She looks great, period. And so a lot of the people, the actors that were being, that auditioned, or that our casting agent tried to align for the role, looked like her sibling. And they were 15, 10, years older, 20 years older than her. But Black don't crack. They look wonderful. And so it didn't work. They did not look like 70-year-old women. And, I was told to just use makeup. And and we'll we'll dye their hair white. And I was like, that's not going to work. We need someone that looks their age. We need a 67, 68-year-old person who's earned every wrinkle on their face. And so what that meant was, working with Maxine, and she had the willingness, and she's got this very calm ease to her where, with age, I think a lot of us know women like this where they're so comfortable in their bodies that they make you comfortable as well. And that was Grandma. And so I just knew, and everyone, even though everyone except Olunuke was just like, we can do this. And so that's all I needed. As long as she was in, we made it work. And I'm so proud. Maxine was nominated alongside most of our cast last year for Best Supporting Role. And she was in a film a couple weeks ago, and she's just thriving. And so the risk was worth it for me. And, again, just because you haven't done something doesn't mean you cannot do it.
Banff World Media Festival thanks its DOV Elevate partner, the Indigenous Screen Office. ISO supports First Nations, Inuit, and Métis creators across Canada, fostering narrative sovereignty, cultural revitalization, and Indigenous storytelling on all platforms through advocacy and funding. Find out more at iso-bea.ca.
That, Karen. And that is exactly what it's all about. It is about taking that risk, that one person that's willing to see that talent and take a risk, but also, to give you, and you should be very proud, to give you, your flowers actually, and some credit here. I had the pleasure of getting to see this film at TIFF, and I got to speak with Maxine after the screening, and she actually said that she attested and said, she was able to do so well because she was so supported by you and the cast. And she actually describes a moment where she said you were shooting a scene, and she said she blanked on some lines. And you came over to her and just spoke to her and gave her moment. And then she was able to go back into it. How amazing would that be? And in any scenario, whether it's actors, whether it's first-time person wanting to be directors, people of color, Indigenous, that are trying to get into these spaces, and someone is just willing to just be a little bit more patient and willing to take that risk when they see that talent. How different could we, change our industry, especially in Canada, rather opposed to giving someone their first chance and then they're not perfect and like, well, see, they messed up, right? So kudos to you for doing that and opening up the space, especially within, the Black community where there is so much talent, but maybe there's not a necessarily point of entrance. So yeah, amazing. Both of you, make work again that's deeply personal, and obviously that's showing here in how you're answering your questions, but and very rooted in your own histories and your own communities and your own body experiences. How do you protect yourself emotionally when the story you're telling is also your story? And Jamie, I'll get you to start.
How do I protect myself emotionally? In my first film, Reconciliation, I didn't. And that I remember our budget. We had about, I think I put about I would say like somewhere around like $65,000 to like help with like emotional supports for this film that I was making. Because then not only did I showrun it, I also directed it. I also I starred in it as well, which I never wanted to do. And it turned out that when those supports were removed from the budget, it really affected, because I learned a lot about my family on camera in real time, which I wasn't prepared to hear, especially on camera. And in the end, when I went into the post-production phase and having to do all of the producer duties of audits and compliance reviews that I had to go into, I emotionally wasn't able to. And it really affected the marketing strategy that we had in place. It affected my reporting period as well. It affected like how I was able to not be able to Like I'm just wrapping up this film reconciliation with like CMF and Indigenous Screen Office just now. And I finished this film about 2.5 years ago. And it shouldn't have taken that long. So I feel like when those types of supports, and again, that portion of that budget was removed not by me, but by one of the producers I thought I needed in order to make this content and this film happen. And when that was removed and I suffered for it and the film suffered, I think that was a really big lesson for me where in my next film that my new feature that I'm doing now, is not only do we have a large budget and supports in place for folks on the screen, but also folks who are behind the screen as well, for our cast and our crew.
Amazing. I'm sorry you had to go through that to learn it, but that's good to hear that for the next project you have that. And Karen, what about for you? How do you protect
That's the
yourself?
first line item to go. It's a first line item that no one will take seriously. And it's a hard thing to explain to folks sometimes. So, it's hard to explain sometimes. But I do think it's imperative, especially when you're doing this kind of work, that's about yourself. It's not just about protecting, other people's mental health. It's hard to make a stance against trying to protect your own. I'm still working on that right now. So Jamie, you've reminded me to make sure that line item stays intact. I appreciate that. But it's a constant struggle, I think. And it's not something that I think I've perfected. And particularly in the doc space, we're still building infrastructures in Canada that support filmmakers and artists around mental health. And I think we just have a lot of work to do yet.
Well, that's a good point in terms of going into the next question. I guess that would be one of the things for emerging filmmakers to note, taking care of yourself and not taking that off the line item, especially in the doc space. But what else would you then say to emerging filmmakers who are trying to get their first feature off the ground? What is the one thing about the Canadian financing system that nobody prepares you for?
I went to Emily Carr, which is an art school, and, they teach you how to be an artist. They teach you how to find your voice and all kinds of things. But what they don't teach you is business. They don't teach you any type of ownership of your or understanding of how the grant system works or the tax system. And so that doesn't help very much. You'll always beholden on someone else. And so it's a constant struggle. But I think what I've learned overall is we do have a great grant system here. And so just leaning on and understanding the different provincial and federal grant systems that we have available and focusing on things like things have changed where there aren't as many as there were before, but there's still things intact. There are delegations like the ones that we're going on for Banff. Through almost every film festival has a delegation that's available to you. And so there are things that just takes a little bit of digging. It takes a little bit of, unfortunately, learning the hard way. And so what I start with in the beginning of my calendar year or at the end, depending on where you're looking at it, is you go through the whole year and you put in your calendar every single grant that's available to you. You do the research ahead of the time. And then you are constantly working on something. Another bit of advice that I got is don't just have one thing. Don't just have one. Have a couple of things that you're working on and manage your time that way. So you're constantly applying, but you're constantly also working on things creatively at the same time. But yeah, it's unfortunately, it is complicated and, but not impossible.
And Jamie, for you?
Oh, I feel my answer is going to come off a little angry, and I'm not an angry person. But I think and I can only speak to like Indigenous content creators out there. I don't know what this experience would be for Black POC and femme folks. But I do know through my own personal experiences is there are producers out there, especially at like these big foreign markets. You go to Banff, and I find them to be predatory when it comes to new and emerging folks, because like first time I went to Banff was like in 2009, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna pitch my show and I'm gonna get it made and I'm gonna take care of my family, and that's the hope that I came with. And then I would be approached by producers who like wanted to help me, and that's the word they would use. They want to help me to create what I wanted to create, and they saw value in it. And unfortunately, what would turn out, and this is something I had to experience, is they would take a concept that I had, access Indigenous dollars, and become the majority shareholder in the incorporation that was created to make that content. And I don't think a lot of folks understand that these incorporations that are needed in order to access this funding, not only does it allow for the content to be made, but it takes ownership of language and culture and stories and experiences. And I it got to the point where like I had this mentor of mine, and I was working with them for 7 years. And one day they came to me and they're like, "Look, we developed all these projects together about like Indigenous stories and your family, and now you need to pay back what you owe for the money that I invested into it. Otherwise, I'm going to take them." And that was a really hard thing for me to understand, because like I thought you were here to help me. And the fact that I had to like pay this producer out to get the IP back for the content I created with them. I mean, I was more than willing to do it. It was really hard for me to do at that stage of my career, but I did. And I think that's the most important advice I can give to emerging folks is be mindful of folks who approach you and want to help you create your content. Understand there's a legal framework behind it. There's a lot, unfortunately, the filmmaking or media content industry, it's a form of capitalism. It does take ownership of stories and languages and cultures in the form of incorporation, and in order to market, and just to be mindful of who you're going into those business partnerships and relationships with. It needs to be like now when I go to Banff, I'm not going hopeful. I'm going as looking to create a beneficial agreement that's going to benefit not only the folks that I'm bringing with me and the stories I'm trying to share, but also the broadcasters or funders that we're going to be partnering with. So an agreement that's going to benefit both sides.
I love that. And I think that's really key advice, because definitely, the early stages is the part where you're excited to create and may forget about the legal aspects of it. So that is such a good point. And I'm glad that you have, a focus and a drive for what you want to do when you're heading to Banff. Is there anything that was actually going to be my next question? What do you hope to achieve when you get to Banff? Karen, you can answer this, but also I was just going to add on in terms of, I think about our fellowship programs, and I know exactly what you're talking about, Jamie, in terms of the predatorial kind of aspect. And I think for our programs, one of the things that was important is that those who applied have at least 50%, 51% ownership of their projects. Because you don't want that to be lost. So I do hope that you feel, empowered, not only just through our program, but coming to Banff this year, that you feel confident in terms of what you're presenting and that it's yours, and you have your voice to pitch it and to whoever you want to work with. Karen, what do you hope to achieve when you get to Banff?
I think I'm most interested and looking forward to meeting like-minded folks like Jamie. Filmmaking can be lonely, and you could kind of feel pretty isolated. And I think there's strength in numbers, and there's strength in communicating and talking about different loopholes and strategies, frankly. And so I'm always excited to chat with other colleagues about what they're doing and how they're doing it. I think I'm also really excited about. There's so much doom and gloom. There's a lot of negativity, and it's frank in terms of talking about what our challenges in terms of the industry right now. But I also protect my creative space around, so I understand what's happening, but it's also none of my business as a creator. I still have to create things. I still have to find joy in what I'm doing. I still have to make other people excited about what I'm doing. And so that there's a lot of effort involved in protecting that space. And I think places like Banff is, that's where we get to put our energy and meet other people. And I think there is a lot happening financially. There's a lot happening structurally, but we need stories. And I think places like Banff are where they can go to thrive, and like attracts like. And I'm just interested in finding the people that are excited and resilient and stubborn as I am.
Love that. Love that. Jamie, anything else you want to add? Or what you want to achieve at Banff? Or
Yeah, I'm actually taking. This is the first time I'm taking a project to Banff that is 100% owned by me. It's a story about my family. So like I grew up in Pasquamustu-Siagan. It's the Buffalo Lake Métis settlement in Treaty 6 territory. Banff is like a 5-hour drive from here. And I'm excited to go this year because it's not like other years in the past where I was just hoping for the best. Like I actually have a plan in place and know exactly what it is I want and what I want to achieve. And I'm bringing this story about, like my family lived in this place. I'm not sure if folks are too familiar with like Métis history in Canada, but like my family went to war with Canada. We're one of the last nations to go to war with Canada in the late 1800s. And because of that, and because of of that resistance and the outcome, like my families were a couple of generations lived on road allowances, which were these parcels of land that were designated for highways. And then once the provincial government or federal government wanted to put a road in, they would come in, take down our homesteads, and we'd have to move. Because my grandparents, though, fought in World War II, we were allowed to take up settlement in the community where I live now. And in the 1960s, then they weren't allowed to, like, they weren't allowed in a lot of towns or to rent in certain places. So in the 1960s, when my mother and my family were able to move into the city of Edmonton and the capital city of Alberta for the first time, it was a really exciting time for them. My grandparents had 14 children, and they moved into Edmonton in the 60s. And this is the show that I'm bringing, is about that experience of leaving the trap line and leaving the bush and able to move into like this Canadian dream of what it was in the 1960s and how exciting that period was. And the types of experiences that they had as a family, because like there's, I think they call Métis families, the term they use is rainbow families. Like my mother, she's strawberry blonde with green eyes, but she had brothers who had dark skin and dark hair and dark eyes. And when they went into a place like Edmonton, they had two very different experiences based on what they looked like at that time. And to have that dynamic exist within a family unit and the types of tensions it would create and the types of experiences that they've had and stories that were because of how they looked. But that's exciting for me to share that story and that experience within one family unit, but also that time period. So I'm really excited to go to Banff and to hope that people see the value in this scripted series that I'm bringing, and to create, like I said, like going into a development deal to have this series brought to life.
Jamie, we do see the value. That's why you are one of the 10. So excited to have you both come out this year. And thank you so much, Karen and Jamie, for your time today on the podcast. And if anyone is watching, producers, broadcasters, fellow producers and writers that are interested in connecting with Jamie and Karen, you can reach out now on Banff Exchange and set up a meeting if you don't want to reach out to them. If you're in Banff, if you're heading to Banff as well, set up a meeting, or even afterwards, you can reach out to them too. So thank you both very much, and that's it.
This episode of the DOV Elevate Podcast is presented by Playback and is an extension of the Diversity of Voices Fellowship presented by Banff World Media Festival. If you're a mid to established level producer, director, or writer who identifies as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, the Diversity of Voices Elevate program was built for you. DOV Elevate connects exceptional Canadian screen industry talent to the global stage through Banff World Media Festival. Pitch your projects, meet the decision makers, accelerate your career, elevate your voice. Learn more at banffmediafestival.com. All links mentioned in this episode are provided in the description below for video and in the show notes for audio.